We are going to talk about a band who are causing much more of a stir right now next, and that band is Lorna Shore, and their record Pain Remains, which it feels like all of the talk that we have had about the boom in deathcore over the last 2 or 3 years seems to have been leading us up to having this particular talk, because Lorna Shore, I don't think I need to introduce to any of you at this stage. They've gone from kind of deathcore also-rans for most of the 2010s to now being one of the single hottest properties in metal on the face of the earth. They had an absolute game-changing year in 2020 off the back of just an EP, since which they have spawned countless imitators. They've sold out tours. They've just played fucking Lollapalooza. They've just been opening up for Parkway Drive's arena run and been crushing that, from what I have been told. So now to get the first full-length album of this kind of new and improved form of Lorna Shore feels like quite an event. And, you know, we started our new reviews format off at the beginning of this year with discussions of Enterprise Earth and Shadow of Intent. And all of this discussion seems to revolve around Lorna Shore as the anointed ones of this movement. Sam, the And I Return to Nothingness EP is 3 songs that most young deathcore fans now pretty much know by heart. The jump from there to a 62-minute release is something quite bold. How successful do you think this is in taking what was successful about their EP and expanding it over a whole album?
I mean, it basically is like, what did people like about the EP? We are just going to do more of that and make it bigger in every way. And, like, this album's a lot. Like, there is, like, I can't think of a deathcore album that in a while that has had this much, like, kind of like, having to actually play it over and kind of go like, there is so much going on here. I mean, that's before we even get to the 21-minute suite at the end of the record. Like, this is a big ask for deathcore fans, I think.
It's an insanely ambitious thing for a deathcore record, right? Like, 7-minute opener, as you say, 3-part closing suite. And the thing I quite like about Lorna Shore is their mission statement just seems to be, let's make deathcore really pompous. Let's make it, like, completely unashamedly fucking overblown and ridiculous, and we're not going to care what anyone thinks of that.
Like, it's the fusion of that complete, like, Euro metal insanity with, we're also going to make it the most obnoxious, be the most obnoxious, ignorant, heavy deathcore band at the same time. And it's that fusion that I just think is, like, it's fascinating that that's got over.
Well, for me, I thought I was well past liking any more deathcore bands. For me, it was a genre that I had sort of assigned to the nostalgia part of my brain. Like, I listened to The Cleansing or The Somatic Defilement or Hate, that sort of thing. I go, ignorant nonsense. Let's get it on. So I thought the idea of me getting excited about a deathcore band was long gone. Not in the last 5 or 6 years have I ever looked twice at a deathcore band. And yet, So I didn't have much anticipation for this album, I should say. I listened to the EP and some of the earlier stuff, and I thought, oh, this is kind of cool. Put this on. Immediately, the personality just bursts from the speakers, and that is something that the great deathcore bands have. I mean, I think we spoke about this on the Bloodstock special, but the great deathcore bands, they have amazing frontmen. So it's like, Mitch Lucker, Eddie Hamida,
Phil Bozeman,
CJ, Phil Bozeman.
Yeah.
Will Ramos he's in that mould, but he's also got something unique about him, some sort of flair that, again, differentiates Lorna Shore from their predecessors and pushes deathcore into a new age that is genuinely exciting.
Yeah, and for me, I think the personality is really, really detectable in almost more so, like, the musicianship, like, compared to, because, again, the fact that this is so just, like, unashamedly OTT with it in a very, bombastic way. I mean, the symphonic deathcore thing is, like, already overdone now, and I think Lorna Shore are almost, because I don't want to, like, their 2010s work, they were kind of making the steps to kind of do that thing. I think that's kind of where that ball's really started running. So I don't think you could lump Lorna Shore in as, like, trend chasers, because like they're kind of they're the band that people are copying to do this thing, and I think we always like to view those bands with a little bit more sort of a credibility, I guess, and not write it off as like part of a trend or whatever. And the symphonic deathcore thing is already overdone now, and it's rare that something gets like as oversaturated as quickly today as this thing has. And so often when I hear it, I don't actually need any more of it at this stage. But it is a base kind of principle that I enjoy. And when I hear Lorna Shore as, like, again, the kind of the band who are like the flagship band for it, I'm more interested in the kind of flights of fancy the sound can take over just who can do the heaviest breakdown, which is what it feels like so much of deathcore always has been. What do you make of, I guess, how that changes the makeup, like, of the deathcore band that is present on this record?
It still is, in so many points, who can do the heaviest breakdown, but there's so much more to it, and it is so over the top. And deathcore's done, like, technical stuff, you know, like, technical playing with deathcore is nothing new, but the way Lorna Shore just go about it with, like, the flights of fancy on the guitar work, and when they are doing the symphonic stuff, they're going so big on it. Again, like, it sounds grander than what any other symphonic deathcore band is doing, and it just gives them so much more character, so much more personality. It's much more involving listen.
Well, when I heard the phrase symphonic deathcore being bandied around, I just thought, like, sounds like Flesh God Apocalypse with neck tattoos. I can't get too excited about that.
It kind of was like.
But the thing about Lorna Shore that really strikes me is their symphonic elements aren't just, okay, let's take the riff and then we'll have violins play it. It's, you know, super heavy in the metallic end, but the symphonic stuff is so uplifting. It's like Lord of the Rings, Final Fantasy, those sort of soundtracks. It's just so bombastic, and not in a, you know, dramatic, uber-serious, po-faced way. It's deliberately uplifting. I mean, a lot has been made of the song Pain Remains 1. I'm sure we'll get to the suite later, but about that being the deathcore ballad, which is, you know, a pair of words that should send shivers down the spine. So I was kind of, you know, wincing at the thought of it. And it's a complete success. It is, you know, unquestionably a deathcore song, but it has that light is in the air element, which I didn't think you could translate into this genre ever. So it was a very refreshing thing to have something that's, you know, so saturated, as you said, but, you know, done with such glee and fervour.
Yeah, I think my favourite thing about Lorna Shore is actually that it's almost like the emotional intent of the music isn't actually just to be aggressive, like, which is kind of new for deathcore, because even the deathcore bands that I love from fucking 10, 15 years ago or whatever, I loved the stuff that was just gnarly and crushing or whatever. And there's a bit in Welcome Back at the 2.5 minute mark where the riff goes on like a really evil tremolo black metal, where it feels like not just the orchestration but the riffing just for that little moment is taken from Dimmu Borgir. But the musicianship is really top notch. I mean, when you see them live, and even with the orchestral tracks and stuff, you marvel at the guitar players and so on. And there's this really Winter Sun-esque, like, technical melodicism in it that I love. And when you hear the solos, you can tell that they are fans of, you know, the Faceless and the Black Dahlia Murder and Obscura, and it was like, you know, very melodically capable, emotionally expressive kind of death metal bands. But when that goes through to, you know, like the technicality in something like Sun Eater, where the solo is so bright and dazzling, in a way, music that's as normally completely concerned with sounding tough and hard as deathcore historically has, I think even more than like most of Lorna Shore's clones haven't quite twigged onto the idea that this emotionally is bolder. It's not just normal deathcore that they've put some synths on or something. They're thinking in terms of like epic heavy metal, and that's the thing I love most about this. Its emotional peers aren't like Fit for an Autopsy or Slaughter to Prevail or whatever. It's trying to be the deathcore Time One by Winter Sun, and that's the level of like uplifting and like fucking grandiose that it's aiming for.
I think like Sun Eater is genuinely stirring, and I don't think I could say that about another deathcore song really. Like the strings, the sort of the choirs at the start, where it's like the moment of calm before the chaos. It is such like, it has just such a colossal sense of grandeur and you're right, emotional weight to it that no other bands have kind of been able to capture. And then you get Will Ramos doing the most ridiculous vocals amongst all this, and that doesn't undermine it. Like, he could be doing like full of like Mike Patton like goblin voices and playing different characters in it really, like, but it never undermines the actual like emotional heft of the music.
When they initially got announced for the Parkway Drive tour, I thought that sounds like an odd fit, you know. It's a bit sort of... Is that not a bit nasty, a bit sort of churning for a Parkway Drive audience in 2022? But listening to this, it was almost like the sort of feeling I got from Aya, taken to a further extreme, because that album is, still heavy, still meaty, but super positive, super uplifting, and, as you say, stirring. And I didn't think that sort of feeling could be translated into deathcore, because it's just that one bit, more nihilistic, or that one step heavier. And so it's so exciting to listen to something that manages that sort of seemingly Herculean task.
Yeah, for me, I mean, the production still feels deathcore, right? Like, there are sub-drops, and, the guitars, when they kind of crunch, they don't necessarily feel like the most natural. It's like being slapped with a big compressed brick. And I think that's maybe where some people might have problems with the symphonic stuff, because it's in records that don't naturally allow it to kind of sonically swim to the surface. I think that criticism is fair. I do like the... there's a kind of high and lowbrow clash of cultures, right? Like, Into the Earth starts with these insane, like, stabbing Cradle of Filth strings before the band smack in. And I just love the atmosphere of that. The extreme, like, Baroque drama and obnoxious cartoon brutality. In a way, that is an expansion, sort of spiritually, of what bands like Cradle were doing when they had, like, high sophistication, and then, by the way, this song's called Gilded Cunt. And that, like, high and lowbrow clash... It's never more funny when they do a big guttural pig squealy breakdown, and it's almost like they flick a switch in the mixing to make the guitars or anything like as obnoxious as possible. But then the chorus in Into the Earth has that huge like takeoff, which is genuinely quite breathtaking. And then the key change hits with that melody, and I feel like I'm going to explode. And like bands like Flesh God Apocalypse or Winter Sun or even a Noun or Thrack before them, they are able to use the kind of orchestral melodies to add this stirring grace to when they go all out blast, and those two things sort of complement each other to make you feel like you're flying, like it's all over Sun Eater, that kind of triumphant galloping over the hill majesty on top of that kind of blasting ferocity. Like, as much as, again, I think some of the production on this, it almost swamps some of what you're really wanting to hear. Like, I would love to hear like the isolated tracks of just the orchestration and stuff. Like, if they wanted to do a deluxe disc of like Pain Remains soundtrack edition of just fucking treat it like a video game score or something, because there's so much good stuff. Like the Pain Remains songs are full of it.
This is one of those times I'm like, I could understand them releasing an instrumental version of it, unlike some sort of deathcore bands.
Yeah, please don't release just an instrumental version. Release the orchestral version.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I always fucking complain when Epica or someone or Nightwish does like, oh, we're just going to do an orchestral version. I think the difference is their records are balanced and mixed so well that you can make it out all the time anyway. Whereas this, like, you want to uncover some of what's maybe hidden.
Yeah, I guess so. But I think it kind of is that push and pull of still having to deliver the big meat-headed breakdowns, basically. Yeah. Which, again...
It's bold, you know?
Like, when they do drop those breakdowns, I chuckle every time. I'm just like... like, when a band can just go that obnoxiously heavy, and like I say, yeah, the guitars do then get that kind of processed sound going on, and it kind of is at odds with the like more stirring grand orchestral stuff. It's still fun.
Yeah, and I think with Will Ramos, for everything that's said about him, I don't think vocal hooks are particularly necessarily his main skill. Like, he's not CJ McMahon in terms of like coming up with these huge refrains, or in terms of making the stranger shit catchy, he's nowhere near Travis Ryan. But he does feel like he's putting quite a bit of feeling into it when it just, when that roar and takeoff goes, you have the kind of that scream into like huge emotional moments of lift like you get in Soulless Existence, where it feels like the tools of one kind of band and the tools of another trying to come together to achieve something. And I mean, when he does just go goblin mode, like the end of Into the Earth, like, it is just fucking brilliant. But like, he's almost become like the mascot of the band, right? Like, oh my god, Will Ramos. But like, when you listen to this album, he puts in a great performance, but he's not even necessarily like the most compelling component of it. The orchestral melodies and like the lead guitar lines carry the bulk of the momentum and the emotion, and then he fills in the blanks really, really well.
But a lot of deathcore bands, on the lower echelons, they don't necessarily seem like it's a person delivering those vocal lines. It's almost like computer-generated grunts. So Will Ramos, his skill, and it's a skill shared with, as I was saying earlier, the major frontmen of this genre, is that you do get a personality. You can see how he's a different character from Mitch Lucker, Phil Bozeman, that sort of thing. And ultimately, that as a skill to translate through death growls, I don't want to underestimate it, here, because especially as you say with the orchestrals and savage breakdowns and that sort of thing. It's a very hard thing to sort of push your personality through. I can imagine it takes quite a great deal of effort.
No, I completely agree. And the Pain Remains suite is where you go like, no band in this subgenre, to my knowledge, has even attempted something like that.
The closest would be the Acacia Strain doing like a 27-minute song, like, but that's all kind of like
they tend to
sludgy,
go more
doomy.
they go down more the doom route. No one's attempted something like this, which is again sort of the trying to make. I think you can feel on this album how they're trying really, really hard to do something new with this kind of music. And when they land the big moment, like, A World Without You Isn't Meant For Me at the end of part one, it is like, wow, I didn't fucking expect this to come from this sort of world. And then you get the transition from that into part two. There is a momentum to it. I think the kind of crack in the armor there is how many different ideas are there in just that suite of the album before looking at the rest of it. It's not really all that many. There is a kind of overriding one mode that it exists in. And for as like insanely fucking epic all the time as something like Time by Wintersun is, or Death Cult Armageddon by Dimmu Borgir is, which are the albums this is aspiring to kind of reach, they're actually quite efficient and they don't replicate tricks per song too much. This album feels like it is really, really gunning to do something new with this music and take it over into new pastures. But it doesn't really feel like Lorna Shore write too many different types of song right now, to be honest.
I think that's fair. I think, like I say, again, this is 62 minutes. I think I would keep that 21-minute suite. Like, that is like where they are nailing all these different ideas. But there's maybe a few songs in the build to that where it does kind of feel like this is just more of the big slamming breakdowns, the sweeping orchestral stuff, and not finding new ways to sort of present that. So it can get a bit, I don't want to say numbing, but just like it like the novelty and the excitement might wear off a touch.
I love the sound of this, but there's a homogeneity to this album that the big symphonic metal albums that it's aspiring to be like don't have, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think that's it. Is maybe if there were a couple more stand-up singles or things like that, might have helped.
I have the same feeling, to be honest, because listening to it, I'm just excited that a deathcore band has done anything that's really excites me in 2022. I think that's novelty enough. So if they need to take 60 minutes to do that, I'm not too upset. But I hope in the future they sort of streamline, focus on the strengths. Get rid of some of the whole thing of let's do as much as we can as possible isn't necessarily the wisest move in terms of making a long-lasting album that you want to listen to again and again. So yeah, no, I more or less agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think, even though their sound is maybe less novel, I think the Shadow of Intent record that we did in January does a slightly better job of making just different songs feel distinct. And I think part of that comes down to how the metal in them is actually less chuggy deathcore and more akin to a death metal band like a Septic Flash or someone who can do a little more. And I think Lorna Shore, they've landed on a sound that is blowing people's minds and is making massive waves. I wonder, have they sort of painted themselves into a corner with it a bit where they can't do quite as much with it as they think? And in a few years, it ends up having worn off its effect on people if it doesn't have the variation. And part of me has a sneaking suspicion that might be how this thing kind of pans out if they can't keep pushing it. But it is so overblown. It is shooting so hard to be the most epic shit you've ever heard that I can't not be really endeared by it, even when there are only a few songs that I really remember.
Well, to me, I mean, this is a slightly odd comparison, but to me it's a bit like the Dragon Force thing, where it's like every song
that's a great
is
shout,
8 minutes
actually.
long,
Yeah.
loads of guitar solos, super big chorus, and you think, do I need 9 of these? And after that you go, do I need another 6 albums? But they made power metal exciting to a whole new generation, so this feels, 15 years later, like a comparable case study.
No, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe this is the Inhuman Rampage of symphonic deathcore.
I mean, like I said, I'm down for where they're going, and I think there is this is the first time of them attempting on this scale, where it's been there on the last couple of records, but like they've had a bit more like the sort of the black and like nastier side of it, and never quite shot for the stars like this has. So for a first stab at going this big, I mean, this is really impressive, and I think if they can get someone who can kind of like focus them in a bit more and like push the songwriting to be more memorable and less kind of like every idea happening all the time, they could really work this into something genuinely brilliant. Like, but right now, I think this is a great like reintroduction in a way to Lorna Shore as the biggest band in deathcore right now.
Yeah, one of the trendiest metal bands in the world, for me, is emotionally gunning for boxes that have been ticked by bands like Winter Sun, Dimmu Borgir, Flesh God Apocalypse, even Epica and so on in the past. And it's completely unashamed about that. It's a novel and fun time. And, in fairness, a mark for them over Winter Sun. They didn't take 10 years to make it. So, there you go. Pain Remains by Lorna Shore.